So you can try and become great by creating factions of people who agree with you. You can try and become great by seeking leadership as though you think the best thing that could happen was for me to be in charge and for everyone to think the same way as me. You could make yourself great by putting yourself above people all the time, but guess what? None of them will give you greatness. God will make you great if you put yourself below. We are doing a book of the Bible. The Bible is not one book, it's many books. The book that we're looking at currently is one called the Book of Philippians. It's directed to a people who lived in a place called Philippi. I'm an ancient history teacher, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Philippi because I think it's interesting. You might not. Just tap out for a while, think about something else, and then you can come back in like 2 minutes, right? So Philippi is in a place called ancient Greece, okay? Now, ancient Greece is famous because everyone studies it while they're at school. They don't study it because it's the best civilization ever, though it is pretty dang good. They read about it because they actually wrote stuff down. Most ancient civilizations didn't write down all the things they did in ancient times, but the Greeks did. So it gives us something to read, therefore we can study it. And it also helps that it's quite interesting. If you were to go to Greece, I'm going to try and do a bit of a map for you. So here is the main area of Greece. There's this place here called Sparta that you might have seen a movie about. They're big, bad, scary dudes, right? A little bit north of them are people called the Athenians. I like this team. They're the ones who invented democracy. If you go a little bit further north, you end up at Macedon. And in Macedon is a city called Philippi. They called it Philippi after a guy named Philip. Very creative. He was the father of Alexander the Great, who you may have heard of. Yes? Some of you? Yeah, okay, cool. If I go this direction, I'll eventually, if I keep on going, I'll end up in a place that we would call Turkey. But back around this time, it was kind of like Persia. I actually changed teams lots of times, that particular area. And then that's kind of the area in the world that we're talking about. If you keep going south, eventually you'll hit Israel. Now, the thing about Philippi is that they have had a very interesting history. The people who lived here often never got to rule themselves. They often were ruled by someone else. So if there was a period of time where Sparta was in charge, there's a period of time when Athens was in charge, there was this brief moment when they were in charge of themselves because Alexander the Great was super powerful, right? But he wasn't an empire builder, he was just about himself. So once he died, that ended. There was a period when the Persians were in charge. There was a period probably at the moment that this letter is written when the Romans were in charge. And so Paul, who is an apostle guy who wrote lots of the books of the Bible, is writing to the Christian people who live in this place. And he's got some specific advice for them about what it means to be a Christian in this day and age. And in this section, it's chapter 2. You're welcome to look at it on your phone if you like. But it starts with this phrase. It says, if you've gotten anything out of being a Christian, if you've gotten anything at all, if this whole faith experience has given you anything, then use that power for one thing. He says, use it to make my joy complete. It's like, if you want to make me happy, do this thing. He says, the thing is, I want you to do, he says, I want you to be like-minded. Now, you've got to remember, this group of people I just told you the history of is a very diverse group of people. You would have Athenians living in there. You'd have Spartans living in there. You'd have Persians living in there. You'd probably have Babylonians even living in there. You would have Romans living there. You'd have Philippians living in there. Macedonians, probably what they'd call themselves, or just Greeks sometimes for the sake of making it easy. Point being, this huge group of lots of different types of people who all happen to have one faith, he's saying be like-minded. And I hear that, and I think that might be something that we could hear a bit today. I reckon in the last 6 months, I have been asked more than any other time in my life what tribe I belong to on lots and lots of controversial issues. I bet you have as well. Been asked, are you pro or anti? Insert how many different things, am I right? Mask, vaccination, virus. I've heard things about, are you pro-fathers or pro-mothers? As though that's a thing to be pro or against. I don't know if you've been stuck in one of those ones before. I've been stuck in that one. Very strange. Talking about the rights of fathers and stuff like that. That's another one. I'm a history teacher from another life, as in before I had my current job. And for that reason, people like bringing up with me political things. So that, are you left? Are you right? Are you center? They're bringing up, are you pro-America or are you pro-Asia? Are you afraid about the rise of China? Are you afraid? I'm sure all of you have found yourselves stuck in a conversation, at least at some point in the last 6 months, where you have asked if this person is in your tribe or not. And it's a loaded statement, isn't it? It's a loaded question, because it's not just what's your opinion. Often, it's almost as though what they're actually asking is, can I be friends with you? Because I won't be if you don't tick and cross all of the exact combination of things that I want you to be on the same page as me with. I am over social media for this very reason. I've been privately messaged more times in the last 6 months about my opinion on issues than any other time in my life. And this is the sort of community that Paul, back 2,000-ish years ago, was writing to and saying, well, guess what? You've got to be like-minded. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if I want to be. Because when I hear like-minded, I think, what does that actually mean? Does that mean I need to start arguing more? Does that mean I need to convince people to have the same opinion as me? Because I don't really want to do that. I'm a bit over arguing with people, and I'm a bit over being argued to. I sense this quiet in the audience. Someone asked before, what are you most nervous about? And I said, I'm most nervous about offending everyone today. I'm a bit over it. I'm a bit over the try and figure out where you fit group, because that's apparently what's really important. And Paul, back in ancient times, was saying, if you have gotten anything out of being a Christian, devote it to this thing. Devote it to being like-minded. It then goes on. I'm going to read a chunk of it here rather than try and quote it from memory, because it's important. It says, chapter 2, verse 2. The chapters and verses were made up later. We just did that so we could find things, in case you're wondering. Anyway, there you go. Make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Now, a couple of things just to pull out straight from there before we get into the practical side of this. Because I think what he's trying to say is there's a temptation when we hear the phrase, be like-minded, think the same way, that we think we all have to have the same opinions. That's not, fortunately, that's not what he's saying. He's saying it's something deeper and better than that. It's having the same love, having the same spirit, having the same purpose, having a deeper thing going on. This afternoon, we're going to watch the Rabbitohs play the Panthers, and each of the players on those teams are very different people. And the team that will win, in part, will be the one that has the same purpose, right? Not that it's the same. Like if you had a team and they were all 5/8, you'd get destroyed. But because you've got lots of different players and they all have the one purpose, it kind of works. So fortunately, being like-minded begins with having the same central core purpose. For Christians, that means to follow Jesus. Have Jesus as our leader and follow him. That's our same purpose. Which sounds great theoretically, but in the practical sense, that's a bit confusing. What does it actually mean to do that? Paul, in writing this letter, gives us some practical advice. And I'm going to have a crack at trying to interpret it because it's confusing. Hopefully it will be of value to you as all of us as a church seek to navigate this complex time where disunity is easy. Like it would be so easy to just pick a team and go bang, bang, bang with a church that matches these 5 things. If you want to be part of us, you have to tick off on them and then you can be part of us. And we'd all feel really good for those who tick them in the right order. And everyone else, well, you got to find your own. Like it would be so easy to be the church that makes it, these are the things. But he's saying, no, be like-minded in love, in spirit, in purpose. And then he goes, well, how? Well, his phrasing here is don't do these things. So sometimes when it's a case of we want to do this, the best way to get there is, well, you'll get there if you don't do these things. And that's exactly what he talks about. So verse 3 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. If you want to live in a world where you don't feel like you have to argue all the time, if you want to live in a world where you feel like you can belong without necessarily having the exact same view on every single issue, if you want to belong to a community where difference is okay, then he's saying these are the things that we need to see. We need to see people who are there without selfish ambition, vain conceit, and who see others as better than themselves. And they use 3 Greek words to describe those. I'm not a Greek scholar, and I will butcher the pronunciation of these, but I feel like the history teacher in me feels like understanding each of these 3 words will help us better understand what each of those things mean. Because selfish ambition, vain conceit, none of you think you're that. like who thinks they're that, right? So if we get to what it really means, maybe we'll be able to do the hard work of being a bit self-reflective. So, selfish ambition, the word itself is erytheia. Erytheia in ancient times was used to describe people who wanted to have power in elections. So in Greece, they used to do voting. That was a thing, right? One of the only ancient civilizations that did that. So cool. And one way you could get voted in was try and be super popular. Try and gather people to your cause, not because of anything you've earned, but by saying what people want to hear. That's what's being described in erytheia. I hear it. One of my jobs right now, one of my roles, is I kind of am a coach for leaders in schools. And this is a common problem that I encounter that you might either have done yourself or you've suffered, okay? When someone's having a whinge and they come to the boss with their complaint, what do they say? They don't say, I have a complaint and this is my issue. They say, people have been saying. There are a bunch of people out there who think these things. And here I am to tell. The question that I always tell these leaders to say is, ask them who. Don't let them say people, because if it's their problem, they need to own it. But people with erytheia as an issue of selfish ambition create factions. They create groups within groups. When it says don't do anything out of selfish ambition, it means don't create factions. Don't create little teams of angry people with an issue that they're going to push harder than anything else. I see it in church world when someone might come to Dan and say, I've been speaking to some people and we think this much must happen. That right there is what that is faction creating. It's saying we're not going to be like-minded in purpose. We're not going to be like-minded in love and by spirit. We're going to have different groups who have different agendas. And suck it in, Dan, senior pastor. You're going to have to navigate that complex world that we're going to create for you. So don't do that. Don't think if I want to get my way, I've got to find all the people that agree with me and then by sheer volume of numbers scare everyone else into agreeing. Don't do that. Then it says, what's the phrase that I use in the English? It is vain conceit, which I've never heard anyone say that actually. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone say vain conceit before. The phrase that is in the Greek is kenodoxia. Now, keno means empty. Doxia means honor. So put them together, you get empty honor. So a person who wants empty honor is a person who wants power for the sake of power. They just want it because they think the best thing that could happen is if everyone was just like me. They look at the issues that are all over their social media and they're afraid and they think it would be so much easier if everyone was like me. And then they try and find people who are just like them. And they seek to be in charge on the basis of that alone, not of anything else. What traditionally happens is people get power or influence based on things that they've done. So it's not empty power, it's power based on something. But kenodoxia would be someone who is just getting power for the sake of it with no basis on which to form it. I hear this again in my job when I'm speaking to leaders who have people who are causing issues, because often difficult conversations is one of the hardest things about being a leader, right? And so the classic one is the person comes up to the boss and says, here's this problem, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it just so happens that the solution is me. And I need a promotion. Like, how often is that the conversation, right? Because That's kenodoxia right there. It's empty power. It's saying you should put me in charge, not on the basis of the years of service that I've done, but because I'm good at finding problems and building factions, and I want power because I think the best thing that could happen is me being in charge. So neither of those. And then the next part it says, and this is the hard one, it says, but instead consider others better than yourselves. And the word here, a tricky word, is hegeomai. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but we get the word hegemony from it, or hegemon, which is a political term you probably have never used. I do in ancient history study. It's a thing that we do right in that. And what it denotes is when another civilization is in charge of you. And it usually is because they deserve it. So it's saying, see others as above you as if they deserve it. The Christian life, the Christian way to unity is saying, yes, we are equal, right? But I will lower myself and place you above as though you deserve it. Another translation for that word is as a guide. And so we just treat others as though they're our guide. And that doesn't mean like in a spiritual sense or a coaching sense as though they know better than us. They might not. They might have a really poor experience. It more means guide like they get to go first. Like if you've got a free weekend day, to put them first would be to do what would be good for them. If you're playing 500, it would mean that your partner has good hearts and you've got okay diamonds, but so you bid more hearts because you're going to support them because it will be good for them. It means in a band, you select the key that the other singer is best for their voice and their vocal range, as though they deserve to be in that position. You know what sucks in a band? When you got to ask to do the solo. You know what's great in a band? When someone asks you to do a solo. You know what I mean? Like it's the same outcome. But it feels totally different when the people around you put you above rather than you are putting yourself above. In terms of this is the line, right? If you've gotten anything out of being a Christian, any love, any hope, any joy, spend it on making us united. And the way we do that is by not putting ourselves above, but by putting ourselves below. By saying, you first, after you, what would you like to do? Let them be the leader as though they deserve it. I play rug tag. It's a version of touch football for old people. And one thing that I've learned over the last little while is if I don't stretch, I get injured. Back when I was younger, stretching was for wusses, right? Now I'm older, if I don't, I notice within about 60 seconds things start going wrong. And I've become aware of this part of my body called knees that I'd never been aware of before. And like, while you have healthy knees, you don't notice you have knees, right? They're just kind of a thing that exists and you just go about your life. When your knees aren't healthy, suddenly you know you have knees now. And you have to change the way you live because you are aware of your injuries, right? It is the same with our ego. You know what's a characteristic of a healthy ego? You're not thinking about it that often. Certainly there are behaviors you can do while you're young to look after your knees better so that when you're older it's going to be less bad, right? But if someone is obsessed with their knees at 5 and 6 years of age, we've got an issue, right? At the same token, a healthy view of ego is a view of ego where you're not thinking about yourself all that much. The verse continues as it's just hammering down. It says, each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others, which is another way of saying, just think about yourself less. Not think about yourself zero. It doesn't say, don't think of yourself, but think of others. It says, but also think of others. So you still have to think of yourself a bit. just not that much. You know you've got a healthy view of yourself when you're not thinking about yourself all that much and instead are thinking of others and how life and way we do it might benefit them. By the way, this is the key to intimacy, both in your married life or in your romantic relationships or with your friendships. If you want to get closer to people, you put yourself beneath. Not in a subservient sense like you're going to be a slave, but in a sense that says, I see your strengths, I see what brings you joy, and I'll do what I can to allow that to be part of your life. And by doing so, we can be unified in this very complicated world. From there on, it then goes into this big excursus about how this is just like what Jesus did. I'm not going to read the whole section here, but I just want to read a few little parts because it's saying you should be like this. And just by the way, that's exactly how Jesus was. And it describes it this way. Your attitude should be like that of Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. That word there, you miss the poetic device in the English, but the make themselves nothing is the word kenosis. And it's obviously connected to the word that we used before, which is kenodoxia. It's the exact same word with a different ending. So it's saying, don't be empty power, be power emptying. Don't take power for no reason, give it away. Make yourself nothing. He's saying, be like Jesus, who had every right to put himself above all and who made himself below. And then it goes hard at the end here. I love this part. So he says, Jesus made himself nothing. And then in verse 9, therefore, God exalted him. And exalted is an old-fashioned word for meaning made great. So you can try and become great by creating factions of people who agree with you. You can try and become great by seeking leadership as though you think the best thing that could happen was for me to be in charge and for everyone to think the same way as me. You could make yourself great by putting yourself above people all the time. But guess what? None of them will give you greatness. God will make you great if you put yourself below. That is how he exalts us. You might remember the Olympics. It feels like it was longer ago than it was, but it wasn't that long ago. There was these two Queensland fellas in the decathlon. You might remember the story. Ash Maloney and Cedric Dubney, maybe? Dubney? Anyway, decathlon is 10 races, right? 10 different events. And in the last race, it was the 1500, and the Australian was currently sitting in third place. And for him to hold on to the medal, he needed to come no less than 10 seconds later than the guy who won the race. His mate, another Australian named Cedric, was completely out of contention and his hamstring was ruined. He should have probably pulled out of the race. But instead, he thought, I'm going to help my mate. And if you've seen the footage, I got to see it live by accident. I had the Olympics on and then this happened. I'm like, this is amazing. So Cedric runs in front of Ash and just runs his absolute heart out, saying, you keep up with me. You keep up with me. This guy who's injured runs as hard as he can. Ash keeps up with him. He's injured as well. Their bodies are wrecked. I mean, it's so many events they have to do. They get around, the 1500 is a lot of laps, right? They get around to the final stretch, and Cedric sees that the guy he has to beat has finished, and he's like, well, you've got 10 seconds to get to there, so go. And it's just shouting at him. If you see the footage, Cedric basically stops running and just shouts at his friend, run, like go as hard as you can, use whatever adrenaline you can find and get there. And the guy runs and he falls over the line. And then Cedric comes up to him and he's just been watching the time. And as soon as he gets there, he just cheers and pours all this love and affection on his friend who made it. He didn't even know. He'd collapsed in exhaustion. He didn't know it had happened. But Cedric had been paying attention to the time and being like, you've done it. You've just gotten a bronze medal in this race. Cedric didn't get any medals. But for me, that's the best story of the Olympics. Seeing someone go, you know what? For my own body, I should probably give up. But for the greatness of someone else, I will set myself below and go far harder than I should have, probably have a longer injury recovery time than I should have, but I will run like this to see you get there. And sure enough, he did. And so, as we reflect all together, if you look through the whole New Testament, if you read all the letters and all the things Jesus says, he goes on about unity a lot. He really talks about Christians being unified being one of the main messages. And I think he does that because we're a good risk of stuffing it up. I mean, any basic look at the Christian church and realizing they've all got a different name would make you go, holy moly. Like, we're good at disunity. He begs us to be good at unity. And to be honest, I would love this community to be characterized by such a united joining in love, in spirit, and in purpose, where we put each other before ourselves so that anyone can belong. I think that would be revolutionary in our society. In a world that tries to put us into camps and put us into tribes, we say no. We are all one in Christ Jesus. Can I get an amen? All right, that's all I got for you. I hope that's okay. We're going to pray, and then we'll get the band up, and we'll sing together. All right, let's eyes closed. Heavenly Father, a book written 2,000 years ago identified unity as a massive issue, as a huge problem of different people with different views, all trying to live together, having one faith, but that's somehow working. And God, I feel that now too. I feel the difficulty of trying to work out how to be unified. Because the world wants me to fit into a group. The world wants me to pick a team, have a view, have a tribe where I agree on all these things and disagree on those things. And the things that I share with others mean that they can be my friends, and people I disagree with I have to isolate myself from. God, I pray we would have something bigger than that. I would hate to be in a community where it's just all about we all have the same views on everything. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't discuss and we don't figure out truth and we don't work towards an answer to things. Doesn't mean that we can't have a contest of ideas. These are all okay, but they have to come from the right place. God, you're not telling us we must have the same opinion, but you are saying we must have the same heart. And that we must be willing to seek the good of others above ourselves. The practical outworking of that is a challenge, and we'll need your help. God, I pray that we will see each other as a fellow family member, that we would see each other as a fellow image bearer of Christ that needs to be raised up. God, I pray we would spend our energy finding out what people are great at, what their strengths are, what their joys are, and figuring out how we can make that more a part of their life, rather than figuring out how do I disagree with you, how can I not fit in, how are you not good enough for me. God, I pray it would be open, not closed. And God, as we just have a little bit of silence, I just pray that we would consider where in our own lives we have deliberately tried to break people apart, where we've deliberately tried to hold people away and say, you can't belong with me. God, convict us of those errors, where we have said, you can only be my friend if you're just like me. God, I pray that we would not be like that. If there's a name in our hearts of someone we know that we have done this with, put it on our hearts right now, God. And I pray before the week is out, we would mend that relationship. God, let us not win this grand life battle by fighting. Let us win it by loving. In your name, amen.